Excited to have you join us for the November meeting of the Salt Lake City R user group. And today we're going to be hearing from Mark Nielsen. Mark is a data scientist at Intermountain Healthcare, which just happens to be who I get my healthcare from, and actually where my spouse works and everything. So it's something I really want Intermountain Healthcare to keep doing good. So Mark specifically leads the development of machine learning engineering pipelines there at IHC to be able to have better implementation of machine learning for the workflows around patients and caregivers. I know that so many people that I talk to use modeling and machine learning in a healthcare context. So it's really great to have Mark speaking with us today. And Mark, specifically, you are going to be speaking on using Bitbucket with R, with continuous integration and continuous deployment with Bitbucket and R. So, Mark, thank you so much for preparing this. We're really happy that you can join us. So, if you want to share your screen and get ready, so if you have questions for Mark as we're going through, you can type them in to the into the chat. If you have a question that you would like to verbally say, we'll probably have time for that at the end. I expect we'll have time for that at the end. So with that, thank you so much, Mark, for preparing.
Yeah. And can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, like Julia said, at Intermountain Healthcare, I've really been I think of my background, right? I'm a trained statistician, have shifted to data science in my work and focus. Not too much of a transition there, but I think throughout my career, I've always wanted to. I've always loved automation, and so that lends itself really well to CI/CD or DevOps principles. And really excited about the kind of explosion growth in the ML ops space. And so a lot of these things that I'm going to share are things that I've learned along the way. And so part of me is actually really excited to share them with you. And also, man, if you've had experience or if you had particular feedback in this space, I'd love to hear it, right? Because this is an area I absolutely don't know everything about, but it's been really fun learning and growing this space. So with that, I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So, I mean, maybe the first question, and maybe most of you are familiar with what is CI/CD, really just stands for continuous integration, and then continuous delivery, and or continuous deployment. And on the continuous integration side, I really think of Git and related tools really helping that space. The idea is that you're not waiting a long time to kind of publish the changes that in the code that you've made to the online repository, right? But that you're doing that day to day, hour by hour, right? You just do it. It's ready, you test it, you integrate it. It's ready, you test it, integrate it. So there's this just kind of continuous improvement of the code, and some of the tool sets that kind of enable that are some of these continuous delivery tools, right? So we're gonna think about like, well, let's automatically run some tests against that code to make sure that all these new additions that we're making is going to break things, right? And let's automatically deploy it to a test or staging environment where we can observe how it's working before we deploy to production. And if you're like really comfortable with your process and automation, you can even do the continuous deployment where you actually push your product, your code product, directly into production, all automatically, right? But that's really up to you. So I put DevOps down here because CI/CD is typically falls under principles that DevOps teams follow, and DevOps just stands for the development and operations. And so you'll see kind of this loop between, like, okay, sometimes you'll even see, instead of dev, you see CI, and then instead of ops, you see CD, right? Just kind of that continuous cycle of evaluating, testing, integrating, and then deploying your code. So included a link here. You can just Google what is CI/CD. This was the first link that came up when I Googled it. So anyway, so kind of alongside this, I want to show a little bit of in practice. And so the latter part of this talk will be a demonstration, and we'll just go as far as we can go. You know, or if you guys want to stay all evening, no, I'm just kidding. Should be fun. But the case study I want to go through, a few years back, I created an R package. It's called NCAAcalcutta package. Really what it's for is we like to try different things rather than just submitting brackets, right, during March Madness. We like to do a Calcutta auction. And, you know, everybody starts with a certain amount of points, and then at every point your team scores, you get back points, right? Anyway, so it's a really fun way. If you want to try something different, you can check it out. And ironically, my source code for this is on GitHub. I know we're talking about Bitbucket today, but anyway, this is really, part of this is a Shiny application you can see, where you basically, it helps you facilitate that that bidding with some randomization of which teams show up, and then there's also tools that help scrape the team information from I think ESPN's web pages. Just kind of fun to play around with. So we'll walk through some of the things that we want to do to improve the deployment of this package. So, and also to lay a little bit of foundation, package development is actually a huge topic. I'm sure it could fill multiple sessions. I'm just going to go very briefly. The packages kind of contained within package, or that make package development really easy, our dev tools. Use this is really trying to streamline or automate, you know, little pieces of yeah, I mean, thinking even about, you know, let's update the version in the description file, right? Tools to really just make things easier. Our Oxygen 2 or Roxygen. I don't know how to say that. Julia, do you know how to say that?
I say it Roxygen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's right.
Cool. Yeah. So Roxygen really is there to make documentation of your packages a lot easier by adding special comments alongside your functions. And then Test That is a framework used to do unit testing. So all of these things you can learn about in Hadley Wickham's R Packages book. And I put the link down at the bottom. I'll also share on these slides on the Salt Lake City R users group GitHub page. That you can have access to these links, and that's a free book, and it's a great book. So and honestly, even before, like, you don't necessarily have to read the book before you get started with package development. Like, RStudio's tools, like the builds tab and menus, are just so intuitive. It makes it super easy to develop your own package. So these are just some screenshots of various functions that we're not gonna use in RStudio, but we're actually gonna utilize the dev tools commands that essentially these drop downs will execute. So okay, and also, of course, there's a cheat sheet. You can look it up for package development. It talks you through some of the basics. Okay, so kind of coming back to the package that I've got, because this was one of my very first packages, and the reason I picked it is because, oh man, it is so messy and it needs a lot of help cleaning things up. So these are kind of our goals for today. Thank you, Julie, for posting the links to those cheat sheets. But our goals for today, really, first, essentially, we're using Git as a framework and Bitbucket as our Git management tool to, with every push up to Bitbucket, we want to automate these things, right? So one of the first things that we're going to want to automate is, let's document our package and then let's run the DevTools check function, right? And really that's going to do a whole bunch of checks. Can it be installed? Can it, do the examples run? So many different checks, and even some making sure that you're properly referencing things and your namespace is set up correctly. It's actually really helpful. And so automating that is kind of nice. And then also after that, I'm going to introduce some additional packages. I discovered one, it's called lintar. It's essentially used for linting. And if you know what linting is, really, that's just kind of automated code reviews. You can create a kind of your own style guide, and this linting process will make recommendations on, okay, you forgot a space behind the comma, or we want all your variable or function names to be camel case or things like that, right? That you can make recommendations for. Then we'll automate the run of our unit tests whenever someone creates a pull request. And then if we get to it, the last two I won't be able to show on the free Bitbucket demo that I have, but we'll talk about how you can build and then deploy your package to production. In my case, we don't have the fancy RStudio tool set and tool suite. In our case, we're going to be pushing it to a Nexus repository. And then the last piece is really just, what if we want to go the next step instead of just linting? What if we want to try and enforce and actually change some of the code based on our style guide? So there's another package called Styler that can help you do that. So a quick introduction to Atlassian Bitbucket. If you hadn't heard of Bitbucket and Bitbucket pipelines, really it's just code repositories, Git code repositories they can host online with integrated CI/CD processes, and the Bitbucket pipelines is that integration of CI/CD. And if your company uses Jira or any of the Atlassian tool suite, can integrate. It integrates really well with those tools. So there are other tools to do this. The one that maybe most are familiar with is GitHub and GitHub Actions. So GitHub Actions is, I believe, is pretty much the same thing as Bitbucket pipelines. It's a way to create those automatic pipelines to trigger based off of various events, right? There are other tools that I've seen that have been integrated with GitHub or GitLab, Circle CI or Travis CI. I know if I were to pick, if I had the money to invest in some of these tools for our organization, maybe I'd consider it. But I almost titled this slide, why Bitbucket? And honestly, it's because I didn't really have a choice. Those are the tools that are available to us at Intermountain for version control and CI/CD, and so that's what we're using, right? GitLab is another great tool that that kind of integrates kind of this whole process as well, and provides lots of CI/CD tools. So just to give you kind of the basics of Bitbucket pipelines, the way you actually enable Bitbucket pipelines to run is that you just add a YAML file. So YAML stands for yet another markup language, right? Another YAML file that's just titled bitbucket-pipelines, right? .yaml. And on the right-hand side here, you can see kind of the framework there. So right up the top is image, and this represents a Docker image that you want your pipeline to run on. And then after you've defined that, you can define your pipelines. Default is going to run every time someone makes a change or push to like every branch in your repository, right? So this simple example shows you how you would basically do the classic hello world script and run it so that you push your code, you go look at the pipelines that has executed, and it's going to print hello world, right? So pretty basic. Other things here that you can trigger based off of, you can trigger when a particular branch changes, or even a particular set of branches. So if you think like release branches or hotfix branches or bug fix, right? You can trigger specifically on that. You can also trigger on tags, all tags or specific tags. There's a lot of flexibility in what you can do. I honestly haven't used bookmarks or the custom pipelines, but one additional thing is that you can do it for pull requests, right? So rather than anytime someone pushes code up to your repository with a new commit, you can have it say, well, whenever someone makes a pull request, and you can do that into a particular branch, like a pull request into the main branch, or pull request in the develop branch, and have different automatic processes run while you're doing that. So when you first kind of initialize, and I'll show you this in Bitbucket, when you initialize it, there's this starter pipeline that you can select when you kind of create your first pipeline. I recommend using that. They do have a bunch of templates. R, unfortunately, or R packages, unfortunately, is not included in that list. And so that's why having this talk today, really, because there weren't a ton of resources out there to start figuring it out and learning. And so I hope this is helpful. There are some out there if you can find them, but once you click that starter pipeline, here's what it looks like, right? They're going to use a default image, Atlassian default image. Not 100% sure on the specifics of, is that CentOS, is that Debian, or right? It's going to be some form of Linux, I'm sure. And then this one actually just put some placeholders in here. You can see all of these scripts essentially are echoing or just printing to the standard out the text you put in, right? So this one is actually running several steps in parallel. I guess all these steps in parallel. Well, no, these first three. You can see indentation matters, right? So these first three steps are in parallel. It's going to do the build and test. It's going to lint. It's going to do a security scan. And then later it has deployment to staging, deployment to production. And to give you a feel what that looks like, you in Bitbucket, you'll have this pipeline section. You can see that this first run was successful, and it shows you the output on the right hand side. And you can see the command we submitted was echo your build and test goes here, and then it shows us the result of that, right? So anyway, wanted to jump into a quick demonstration of this. And I've got slides as a backup in case this doesn't go my way. But so I'm going to start with this demo branch. And you can see that I've got all the functions for my package within these R scripts. This is just the standard standard folder structure for an R package, description namespace with the addition of markdown file. So if I click on pipelines here, this is what you'll see the first time if you don't have any pipelines set up. It'll give you a brief description. You can create your first pipeline. Like I said, they've got a lot of kind of templates out there for you to start on a project. We use several of these. Publishing a Docker image is one that we use, and build and test Python is another. But if you use some of these other tool sets, it's kind of nice to have at least a template to start from. So I'm just going to go ahead and select this first template, and I'm going to go ahead and just commit this. It's going to take a second to enable. So let's see how that runs. Anyway, so oh, there we go. Any thoughts or questions kind of up to this point?
Have you used GitHub Actions enough to be able to compare them at all?
No.
Yeah, I totally resonated with what you said earlier about like, well, we just use what our businesses say to use, because that's totally been my experience too. Like when it comes to something like this, that's always been a decision that maybe someone, if I'm lucky, asks my opinion on, but it's like that's made at a higher level, especially at big orgs.
Yeah.
I am curious, maybe someone who had experience with both, like being able to compare them at all. My experience with GitHub Actions is, it is very similar, but it looks like it's like in concept, it's very similar. In specifics, it's different, right? Like what actually goes into the YAML file. And I'm always just, trying to find ones that other people have done something similar to me and copy and, try this, try this, try this. What did you use to be able to learn what to do?
Oh man, Google.
Okay.
It was hard at first because I Googled like, and see, this is also I wasn't personally familiar with just CI/CD in general, and so it was a little bit hard to kind of get up to speed there and start to know what to search for, at least for me. But I found one example that was pretty complex as a start, and it's kind of interesting. Like at that point in time, I was like, "What is even going on?
Yeah.
Like, I don't even understand this."
Yeah.
But then as I've got more and more familiar with just YAML configuration files in general, through various tools, it's becoming a much more popular way. I almost think of them as like a set of, like, if you have a user interface that you click through, it's almost like I think of like the old wizards that Windows has, like an installation wizard. Like it walks you through kind of the steps and what options do you want to select. A YAML file, I feel like, is essentially a code version of that, right? You
Yeah.
just, you know, hey, for this piece, these are the settings that I want. You know, and in this case, you can even have, you know, part of that structure will actually say, okay, well, here's the scripts that I want to run. Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a really good question. Yeah.
What IDE do you use like when you're editing YAML files? Do you use RStudio or do you use something else?
Yeah. I use RStudio for these
Yeah,
ones.
that's what I use too. It seems to
Yeah.
work pretty well in my opinion for YAML.
Yeah. I did I did switch to, as I was preparing my slides, I switched to VS Code just because um, it had all the right like rich text format set up so that when I copy pasted, you know,
Yeah.
they're both Microsoft, right? So so I can retain some of the syntax highlighting and stuff like that. But yeah, I pretty much use, and actually a lot of times I may even use just Bitbucket itself. Right?
Oh, okay. Just like
They
in
have
the
an
web
okay,
UI? Yeah.
yeah, they have an okay editor. But yeah. Um a lot of times you know, we have like a folder with all of our templates for like an R package or um a Docker image with the R embedded script. You know, we have kind of templates that we'll just kind of like copy paste from into Bitbucket anyway. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's nice. Okay, so looks like this one again was a successful run. You notice it's still waiting on this deployment to production. Um, and that's something we'll talk about as well. You can essentially set up something to trigger manually, right? Um, and so that's how that last one was set up. So you don't have to automatically push to production if you don't want to. So yeah, and really self-explanatory here. Everything ran successfully. So let's go ahead and add um, our first automation to this YAML file, right? So I'm actually just going to use the Bitbucket editor. We now have this Bitbucket pipelines.yaml file. We're going to edit this real quick. Can open my text file that helps me know what to type. Okay, just so I'm not doing all on the fly. All right, so one of the first things I'm gonna go ahead and change here. I'm just gonna get rid of those first few lines. Oh man, sometimes see, this is where it's not an amazing editor, but it works. So first thing I'm gonna change here is I want a Docker image base that has R and DevTools installed. So I'm actually gonna use the Rocker Docker Hub tidy. So it's the Rocker tidyverse. And I'm going to use a specific version just because I know, and I've run it with this version. So you can set those Docker image names and tags here. And then I'm going to copy this over because I know it's a little bit of work to sign this. So I'm going to change this first step. And actually, I'm going to get rid of this parallel. Let's see if Shift Tab works here. Hey, nice. All right, so I'm gonna replace this first step with some of the functions you might be familiar with in R. Instead of build and test, I'm gonna just do a document and check. So first thing we want to make sure is, okay, can we install all of the dependencies of the package? And let's go ahead and run the Roxygen. part, make sure all those things are working correctly. And then we're going to do the check, right? So these, like I said, correspond to those menu options in the Build tab in RStudio. And I'm going to tweak this one a little bit because my code is so messy. There are some warnings, and so in order for us to have a success and be able to see these other steps without having to go fix my code, I'm just going to have an error when there's an error in the check. So I'm going to go ahead and commit this, put a message, add document and check. And you'll notice that once I didn't have to do anything else besides add that file. There are some times that I've noticed that you'll have to like enable, depends on the settings that your organization is probably set up. But if we go to pipelines here now, you can see that it's going to automatically kick off another one. Okay, we got an error. It's going to tell me something. Aha, okay. So one of the things, it's telling me my caches section. Okay. Hey, I didn't practice this last night. Well, I didn't get this error last night. But great debugging section here. So, and a good call out. So I added this caches, and the reason I added this caches is sometimes I want to install a bunch of R packages, and man, you know, that can take a lot of time, right? Depending on which ones you need. And so I'm creating a cache for the site library folder, which contains all of the code for those packages, so that the next time I run my Bitbucket pipeline, it's not going to have to reinstall all of those packages. It'll say, oh, they're already there. They're part of the cache. I think it's a couple days where the cache, if you don't use it, it just wipes out after a couple days. So anyway, it's a nice feature if you want to save a little bit of time. So I'm going to actually edit this one more time and add the additional information that Bitbucket needs to run this. Okay, so I'm creating a definition. My site library cache is going to be user local lib r site library, right? And so anything underneath that folder is going to be cached and available for future runs or future steps in that case. So okay, so add cache definition. Okay, so once that commit is made, because our pipeline is basically set default, it's going to run on every change, right? Every change that's pushed up to your repository. One of the bugs that I wish Atlassian would fix is when you're in a view like this, it doesn't automatically refresh, right? So I have to keep just like refreshing my window, which is kind of annoying. Anyway, that's it is what it is. I think they have it, and lots of people have given that feedback, but it's like way down on their list of priorities. And so it's like, okay, well, and if you use VS Code, actually the VS Code integration with Bitbucket and Atlassian tools does a little bit better at this. So you can watch the build a little bit more as it's running rather than having to refresh every time. So there's a workaround, right? So, okay, so far looks like the dependencies are working well. You can see, just like in your R console, right? Here's the things you would see that run when when you're installing packages, right? Looks like the documentation is working well. It's writing the namespace, some warning messages. Probably need to fix some of those things. And then this other one will show up here once it completes. It just takes a little bit. So I did want to show, so for the sake of time, we're gonna not do these next steps one by one, but you can follow through this YAML file, which is invalid, right? Because I've like appended YAML files, kind of stepping through all the changes that I'm making, and my slides will be available on the Salt Lake City R users group, Bitbucket, not Bitbucket, GitHub page, GitHub repository. Anyway, so let's skip down to where we've added as much as we can. Okay, this is the one here. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this one here, right? So you'll see after we do the document and check, we want to use the linter package to basically do linting on our code. I changed a few things from the defaults. I just, the line length was something that gets me like all the time. I think the default is 80. But you can set it to 120, or I set it to null here to just say, I really don't care how long the lines are, but you can set a standard for your team, right? And then also the object name linter, I also disabled that one because we don't necessarily have a naming convention yet or standard on, we always use camel case, or we always use just all lowercase, or we always use underscores, or anyway. So there's different ways and so many different checks that you can create. I mean, they have a list of so many.
Yeah. I have a question. So when you're running lint here, you're just checking against rules. You're not actually changing something back in Git.
Right.
Okay. You're just checking for whether the rules are
right. And
yeah.
And that is
because that linting package, if you run it locally, it will actually change the files.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
I wonder if it's updated since I've used it last. I do know we have the styler package.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I've used to actually.
Maybe I'm confusing them. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry for interrupting.
Could be. No, you're good. They could have new functionality that I'm not aware of. But it's been months since I really dug into those. But yeah, no, that's helpful. Not there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just copy what we have here. And let's pull up Bitbucket again. Oh man, a little tongue-tied today. Okay, looks like everything ran successfully. You can look at the output. This is really helpful. If I had left this as the default check towards the bottom here, oh, so much work to do to clean this all up. But it does give me 3 warnings as well as 3 notes. And so if you leave it as the default, this actually would fail, and this green would be red, right? And it'd say, hey, it failed. We didn't get past the checking function. And so it's not, because these are not in parallel, it's not even going to go and do the other checks. So you can do that. And maybe I will do that later. You can put some of these in parallel so that they'll run, and then you've got everything you need to say, like, okay, what are all the things that I need to fix? Okay, so the lint is really not meaningful right now because we just printed to the screen. So let's go ahead and add the linting. And in addition to it, we're going to add testing as well. So I'm going to go back to source. I'm debating in my head whether this roundabout way of editing in Bitbucket is faster or slower than just using R and then committing and pushing. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to select everything here and then just paste. All right, so we've got document check. Here's the linting that we set up. And then now we're also going to change, rather than just default, we want on every pull request. So that's what this quote star quote means. On every pull request, we're going to test, right? So, and really simple command here is just, we're just going to run DevTools test. So I'm going to go ahead and commit that. Yeah, I'll just leave that commit message as it is. Not feeling too creative about my Git messages this morning, or afternoon. Oh gosh. Okay, so if we look at pipelines, you'll see again, it's kicked off this next one. The build setup goes a little bit faster because it doesn't need to download the Rocker tidyverse Docker image again. I guess it does some caching there as well, depending on the machine it runs, right? And now we've only got these 2 steps, right? Because if we look back at this code here, our default only has 2 steps now, right? We've gotten rid of the other ones. And then we'll show you how this pull request works as well. So actually, I'm going to go and do that while this other one is running. I'm going to go create a pull request. And I'm going to go from, I need to make sure I have the right repo. I tested this out last night on another one. Okay, I want to pull demo into main. And let's look at the diff. Okay, so we've got some tweaks to the description file and then some test code. And the code that I've added here, this bracket draw left function was like a helper function to draw a bracket in like a Plotly image. It was kind of fun playing around with it, but it's really basic. You just give it, the X and Y coordinates where to start, and then kind of a length and a width for these brackets that we're trying to draw. And so I'm just testing out, okay, here's me just running it. What I expect is a data frame that looks like this. And then I'm also going to run the function that I created with those arguments. And then I want to make sure that they're the one that I created and the one that comes out of the function are exactly the same, right? So now if I go back to pipelines here, oh, no, cancel, I need to create it. So now that I've created that pull request, if I go back to pipelines now, you'll see it's kind of kicked off another process here. Oh, look at that. Failed again. Uh-oh, what did I do? I broke it. Probably some syntax. Ah, okay. Look at that. I copy pasted. And hey, look, great example of what happens when you don't when you let it just do the default, right? It'll say, hey, there's 3 warnings, so we're not going to go past this. Okay. But it should have, whoops, should have done, oh, I wonder if the pull request isn't working either. Okay, well, let me show you the output looks like here. Okay, so you can see in here we did a pull request. Let's look at the pipelines. That one said it failed, but here we see it's successful. Let's go ahead and look at it. So pull request ran the code that I wanted to. You can look at the results just like it shows in the R console and says, hey, you know, there was one test run and it was successful. Woohoo, right? So yeah, there's the demo of Bitbucket pipelines in action. As kind of a wrap up, let me bring back these slides. I'm going to skip through. So in case these didn't all work, I have all these images and code pasted in here, right? So I've got my test, pull request, the result. You can kind of review later as well. So as far as our package build and deployment, that was one of the steps that we wanted to automate. So really the code here is actually very similar to our document and check, except the last step here instead of a check is a build. And for some reason I had to add a path here, basically the path to where I want to store, where do I want to store my tar.gz file? So I created a deploy folder that can store that artifact. I've always gotten in the habit of vignettes equals false, just because I wrote a package that had vignettes that took forever to run. And so there are other options that you can pass into these functions depending on your need. So
does that mean like your coworkers then point to there to install your internal package to that tar.gz?
They could download it from Bitbucket, because you can see I've got an artifact here on Bitbucket. I think again they leave it up on Bitbucket for maybe a couple weeks, right?
Oh, okay, okay.
Right? So it's not necessarily permanent artifact here.
Okay.
But I'm sure I don't know. Part of me wonders, like, if you have enough money, I'm sure they could make it permanent, right? So
sure.
Yeah. So this was our first step: is let's build it, create the tar.gz file, and then put it in this folder location. And someone could download it from Bitbucket. The additional step that we did is I looked up on I've got the link here. Nexus has documentation on how to publish an R tar.gz file to their repository, or to a repository that you set up on there. So essentially, you'll notice in these steps a slight change. Now I've got image as part of my step, right? And so this is a way that you can actually, so you remove image from the top of your script, and now you can put image in each step. And now you've got the ability to say, well, this step, I want it to run on tidyverse, but then this next step, I want it to run on this curl image, right? Just so that you have the various tools you need. And because I did that documentation, because I added that artifact piece, that deploy folder is now available to this next step. And so you can see, you can do this multiple ways. I'm essentially just saying, hey, let's set file name to be whatever's in the deploy folder. You know, I know there's just one tar.gz in there anyway. So once I have that file name, then I can use the environment variables to set my Nexus user, Nexus password. And the nice thing about it is that you can say, hey, Bitbucket, these are secrets. so that when it prints this to the log, right, in Bitbucket, it's not going to print your username and password, right? But it will show the file name because that one's not a secret. So, and then this is in that documentation on Nexus on how to push it using their API. And then, oh yeah, those are the customizations that I made. And then here's an example of that. I've hidden some of our information here on our host and the authorization, but essentially at the end you can kind of see this HTTP 1-200 OK. That's what I look for to know, okay, it succeeded, it pushed to Nexus. And now what I just do is I give the host and path name, you can kind of see here, to my package, or our packages, right? This is essentially our own internal CRAN repository. And now people can set that in R as one of their repos, and they can download packages from there. And this Nexus has been nice because it'll give us the ability to do versions as well, right? So they can download a specific version of our custom package.
Nice.
Anyway, I think we're up on time. There's Styler as well. One of the things that I did have to set up was OAuth 2. It's kind of an awkward thing. Maybe there's a better way to do this because it's like you're doing OAuth from Bitbucket to Bitbucket, and it's like it feels a little bit awkward. But that may be a premium feature. This was some of the code and the link to a post on how to do this through the API and through Bitbucket pipeline specifically. So this one's up in the definitions. We're creating a step. It's almost like a macro. I'd compare it to like a macro in Excel or something. Like you just outline, okay, here are the things that I want to run whenever someone calls the create PR function. And so then later you can see what I'm doing here is, okay, let's install the package styler because it's not on Tidyverse. Let's go ahead and style the package. And then these other steps are what I did. I wanted to create a pull request because I didn't want to make it permanent in case there's some weird quirk in it. Like every time I do something, it keeps trying to change it back. This one basically creates a branch with the suffix styler, and then it'll push that commit and push that change and then create a pull request that then is ready for you to approve and merge if you want. So, and this is what that looked like when we were able to get it running on one of our packages. You can see, oh man, it's really tiny at the bottom. I purposely added a bunch of spaces, and then Styler said, oh, just need one white space here instead of a bunch. So, okay.
Awesome.
Anyway, there's lots of other things that you can do. The sky's the limit. I've added some other links here in addition to the ones that are kind of throughout the slides, but there you go.
Awesome. Mark, that's so interesting and helpful. And thank you so much for putting all this together. I'll find, well, one of us will share the link either on the meetup page or here with the where you put stuff into GitHub for this. If you have any questions for Mark, you can type them into the chat or use your raise your hand feature. I'll kick off one that's a little bit like high level. So I think you probably, like a lot of people who use R, like came from like a statsy kind of background. I don't know if R was like maybe the first programming language you used or one of the first or something like that. And then you've really moved into more of these using these kinds of DevOpsy software engineering kind of tools to like help your team work better and all that. And I was wondering if you could maybe share a little bit about what you liked about that transition, like what maybe a little bit about like what was hard about it, or and maybe about like any opportunities opened up for you, or a little just a little bit about that, because I think a lot of people who start using NR use it for a very specific context, and then maybe realize, oh, do I have to learn these other skills? Should I learn these other skills? That type of thing.
Yeah, yeah. To be honest, so my first language was SAS and R kind of at the same time in school, right? And they didn't even have like formal coursework like how to program in R or how to program in SAS. It was basically, okay, for our multivariate regression, I want you to use R and here's some example code. Have fun, right? Um, so those are some of the things that I think were challenges, right, in growing in this space, is because I didn't necessarily have formal training, so I had to find opportunities for informal training, right? User groups are a big help, and conferences. Like when I was first introduced, I remember someone asking me about, in SAS, I was making like these ultra long comments at the top of my code with dates and saying, here's what I changed in my code on this date. And they're like, oh, you're doing version control. And I was like, is that a thing? I'm like, sure. Yeah, I'm sure. And so shortly after that, I had someone basically say, at a conference, like, hey, here's Git, here's version control, and it changed my life, right? um,
Yes.
yeah, and so another one, a lot of these just kind of grew out of problems that existed at the bank that I worked at. There was this problem where we had a server that was way out of date that we just couldn't change because it was running a model, and if we updated, it would actually change the probabilities that were coming out of that model that we originally validated, right? And so so in we had to either like reset up a whole new server and system and retrain, or one of the tools that a coworker introduced to me at that point in time was Docker, right? It's like, hey, here's a way you can kind of freeze and you're not stuck in this rut of not being able to update all these other models because one of them keeps all the others from being able to run on a new or updated software, right? So anyway, I mean, really, it's I don't know. I've always been excited about it, but most of it has just grown out of problems that existed in getting models into production, and it's nice to have like an ML ops community that's really starting to grow, and that you can actually take a lot of these more specific questions, say, oh, okay, rather than just saying, oh, hey, you DevOps people, can you help me figure this piece out? And there's kind of this bridge that you have to create between your team and their team to get on the same page first, and then say, oh, okay, I think I understand enough that we can work on this. So that's a long answer.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's really interesting, I think, especially for our audience, like people who come and listen, I want to learn about R. I think it's really interesting to reflect on it. Well, we're past time, so I want to let you all go, but I just want to thank you, Mark, so much for sharing this with us. Here, I'll do my little clap emoji. Very nice. Thank you so much for preparing and for sharing this with us, and for thank you all for listening. For those of you who are local to us, I hope you enjoy this little bit of snow we're having. Remember, so next month in December, we're not having a meeting. In January, we will have our lightning talk session, and I will just drop that link one more time for anyone who is here. We would love to hear from you if you're interested in giving a lightning talk in the new year. So thank you all so much. It's been a great year here with the Salt Lake City R user group, and we will